Great. I think it's going to go. Okay, Tatiana, we're live now. So, hi everyone, welcome. My name is Jonna Standish. I'm the host of the Just DAO It Masterclass series. I'm also the head of business development at my DAO, and I'm also involved in a couple of DAOs myself. I'm an ombuds at Bankless DAO, which is like a mediator. And I'm also one of the team members over at FTW DAO, which is a really cool venture capital DAO, and most recently involved in an on-chain dispute resolution project called Peacekeepers, which is also a very exciting project. So welcome everyone. I'm really happy to have, always happy to have our guests on, but I'm really super excited to have our guest on today. So a little bit about this masterclass series. The masterclass series is an extension of the Just DAO It podcast, which was founded by my DAO's CEO and founder, Adam Miller. The Just DAO It masterclass series is something new that we're trying, and we're iterating as we go. So if you have feedback or suggestions for us, please feel free to send those in. We love to hear your feedback and comments. Mainly, we provide this as a way to offer free alpha, free education to the Web3 community and people from Web2 that just are curious about, what is all of this Web3 stuff about and what are DAOs about. But mainly we focus on trying to help DAOs that are either just starting out or DAOs that are already well on their journey that may be coming back and doing some iteration to their legal structures or just the way that they structure themselves or the way that they do their governance. So I'm really excited to have a special guest with us today. Her name is Tatiana Cirulo. She's a Web3 lawyer from the Marshall Islands. And the reason why, first of all, every guest that we have on is special, but the reason why Tatiana is a little bit of a unicorn in her specialness is that my DAO stands for the Marshall Islands DAO. And so what my DAO offers is the DAO LLC from the Marshall Islands. And so there are very few Web3 lawyers in this particular jurisdiction that have this expertise. And so we're really thrilled to have Tatiana as part of our partner network and someone that we can call on regularly to help our clients out and also to just help the Web3 community in general. So Tatiana, welcome, and I'm going to let you give an introduction of yourself because you have such a rich and varied background. I feel like only you could do it justice. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. This is such a great opportunity to talk with you about some of the latest things going on with my DAO. So my background is, I'm an American attorney, so I have my license to practice law in New York and Hawaii. And I've been an attorney for 23 years, but in 2006, I became the general, after many other positions and roles, I became the general counsel of an international engineering firm that had projects all over the Pacific Islands. And one area where there was a lot of business was in the Marshall Islands. So I got licensed to practice in the Marshall Islands. And so I've been working with the laws there and familiarizing myself with the laws and the court system since 2006. And most recently, I got involved with my DAO because of these new laws that were passed to make it possible to register a DAO in the Marshall Islands. First, it came in 2021 with the Nonprofit Entities Act that made it possible to register a nonprofit DAO in the Marshall Islands. And then in November of 2022, another law was passed called the DAO Act of 2022 that sort of clarified and codified some of the laws and also made it possible for for-profit companies to register as DAOs in the Marshall Islands. And most recently, I guess you could say, a big part of drafting the amendment to this DAO Act of 2022 that just passed. It's not actually official yet because the speaker of the Nitagella, which is the name for the legislature in the Marshall Islands, hasn't certified the law yet, but it's coming. And so it's not actually out there in the world yet, but it's about to be. And I do know a lot about it. But to back up, as far as my Marshall Islands experience, I was, and I still am, working with the offshore registry, with the maritime administrator and the offshore corporate registry that registers Marshall Islands vessels and also incorporates businesses in the Marshall Islands. They're not located or resident in the Marshall Islands, but they are just, they're registered there. And I work with clients who either are Marshall Islands companies, or I work with the businesses like banks and other law firms and other companies doing business with them. And so that's been going on for many, many years. And as soon as I learned about this new registry, I was immediately interested and reached out to Jonna and wanted to be part of this registry, of supporting this registry as well.
Well, we're so happy you did. And personally, I'm very happy that you did, because it's been really a pleasure getting to know you and also to discover that we're both sailors. So that's been like a fun discovery for us to talk about. So I love that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so just for everybody's benefit that's tuning in, just to give everybody a summary of the things that we're going to talk about today with Tatiana, who's the Web3 Marshall Islands lawyer and also a maritime lawyer in Marshall Islands, Hawaii, and New York. Just to summarize, what we're going to cover on today's session with Tatiana is we're going to understand a little bit more about the DAO Act of 2022 and the recent amendment that she just talked about, just getting passed but not officially codified, and she'll get into the details of that if I use the correct terminology. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the key differentiators between the Marshall Islands DAO LLC legal wrapper, as we like to call in Web3, and just a little bit of a comparison between what I think are really popular ones from years ago, and even today we still see them pop up, and that's Cayman Islands and also a Swiss foundation. And then we're just going to get into some of the most commonly asked questions by DAOs. Between Tatiana and myself, we talk to lots of DAOs every week, and we get lots of common questions that are asked. And then we get some really interesting outliers that are always fun and exciting to research. And so Tatiana will get into that. But yeah, Tatiana, I would love it if we could just jump right in and talk a little bit about, well, and the other disclaimer that I'd like to make here is that this discussion today with Tatiana, although she is a Web3 attorney and a maritime attorney, this is not legal advice. What we are sharing here are business information, and then maybe what we could call some DAO anecdotes from conversations that we've had. So it's not legal advice and it's not financial advice. So just to clarify that, and I think there's a little disclaimer on the bottom. And Tatiana, if you would like to add any official legal language to that, you can feel free to do so.
Yeah, what you said, that's great.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, so yeah, let's just jump into it. I mean, you were a big part of this DAO Act of 2022's new amendment that's coming up. Can you just share with everybody like how that came about? Is this the first one, or is it like a constant iteration? Can you just get into that a little bit more for anybody that's either an existing client or anybody that's curious about us, or for anybody that's just hearing about the Marshall Islands for the first time by tuning in?
Well, I guess we could just start off giving a general background of the Marshall Islands. I was just at the permissionless conference, and so many people were asking about the Marshall Islands. Really, where are they? How, is it related to the United States? There were all these kind of questions so I just thought I could just briefly say something to demystify the Marshall Islands. So after World War II, the United States, being victorious in the Pacific, gained military control over the Marshall Islands from the Japanese. That happened in like 1944. And so the Marshall Islands became a trust territory of the United States. So yeah, like the United States was acting as its protectorate and part of the United States. Later on in 1983, the Marshall Islands signed a compact of free association with the Marshall Islands signed this compact with the United States to sort of delineate the relationship between the two countries. And then in 1986, it became its own sovereign nation with its own constitution. So it is completely separate from the United States, and it's pretty far away from the United States. It's if you were to fly from Honolulu to the Marshall Islands, the main island, Majuro, it's about, I don't know exactly the minutes, but it's about a 5-hour flight southwest of Honolulu. And you can fly there on United Airlines. And so, yeah, it's its own sovereign nation. It has been influenced by the United States. The Constitution is modeled after the US Constitution. But I mean, everything is its own. It's not exactly like the US.
Right.
The corporate laws and a lot of the other laws are also modeled after US law. The statutes. So like, for example, the Business Corporations Act and the Limited Liability Company.
Oh, I think we have a frozen Tatiana here. Okay, bear with us, folks, because we are live streaming. I think we lost Tatiana. I'm going to have her come back in. So if you're just tuning in, I'm here with guest Tatiana Cerullo, who's a Web3 lawyer who is based or focuses on the Marshall Islands. She's licensed to practice in the Marshall Islands, Hawaii, and the state of New York. She has a background in maritime law and also in Web3. And I think she just joined back in. So let me check here. And what we're going to be covering today while we wait for Tatiana to rejoin is we are going to be covering a couple of learning objectives. She's going to share with us a little bit more about the DAO Act of 2022's most recent amendment. And then she's going to get into the differentiators between the Marshall Islands DAO LLC legal wrapper and some of the common legal entities that we see a lot of DAO projects choosing, which are the Cayman Islands and also a Swiss foundation. And then she's going to just talk a little bit about the most commonly asked questions that she sees DAOs coming in with. And we are, as we mentioned earlier, we are not offering, this is not legal advice or financial advice. We are sharing legal information, and then we're also just sharing information that we hear mostly from the DAO projects and Web3 projects that both myself work with, but mainly Tatiana. So we're thrilled to get that perspective from her. And if she can come back in here, let me just see. Okay, Tatiana, I'm going to bring you back to the stage. Tatiana, can you hear us?
Donna, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
It's okay. I was just filling the space by giving the live stream an update. So I got a real clip.
I was just talking nothing. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, It's okay. So you can jump right back in. I just gave the
Okay.
audience a summary of what we were talking about. So I'll turn it back over to you. But can I just say before you get into, because that's the question that I'm asked often also about where is the Marshall Islands? And you kind of say it's like smack dab between, you would say Hawaii and Japan.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and then the other, I think, most important thing, and keep me honest with these numbers, people ask all the time, oh, it's new. It's new. And so I think the most important thing, and to come from you, because you are a lawyer that is a Marshall Islands practicing lawyer, is that the Marshall Islands is not new at all from a business or legal entity standpoint. In fact, businesses have been incorporating there for decades and decades. And this is where you need to keep me honest. 1 out of every 5 ships in the world are registered in the Marshall Islands. 40 to 50 companies split between the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange are registered in the Marshall Islands. So it is a jurisdiction with a long and rich history within the business, and I'll just say like worldwide maritime and shipping communities. So it's not new at all. It's just the DAO Act of 2022 is new, but doing business in the Marshall Islands is not something new at all.
yeah. I can definitely validate what you said about that. I wouldn't say decades and decades, although 90, yeah, I mean, I guess a few decades. But yeah, the Business Corporations Act, and the non-resident registry, the offshore registry for
Yeah.
maritime corporations and for non-maritime corporations, that's been going on since the 90s. So there's a very well developed and reputable registry called International Registries Inc., and they have offices all over the world, and they are the, I guess, administrator of the offshore registry. So
Okay.
a lot of a lot of banks, a lot of companies out there do have experience with Marshall Islands companies. I am often asked to write legal opinions about whether a certain Marshall Islands company has the capacity to do certain things and what are the laws on this and that. So, um, and that's just part of the due diligence for any project or contract, around the world.
Yeah.
But it's not that they're just totally surprised by the Marshall Islands. It really has been out there for a while.
Yeah.
The DAO registry, it has not been out for decades and decades, but the Marshall Islands is a good home for it because it already has this international reputation that's highly regarded.
Yes, true. And I was going to say, and it may only be a year and a half, but in crypto years, that's like dog years. So it feels like a long time. And there's certainly quite a few DAO projects that have registered there now. So I think that's exciting and promising. And yeah, this new amendment that you were just talking about that you were quite involved in, can you share more with the audience about what that is all about and what the benefits are and what DAOs and Web3 projects can glean from that in terms of, oh, this really would resonate with my project because now with this new amendment, it offers, I don't know, I'm waiting for you to unveil it, X, Y, and Z.
Sure. So, well, first of all, the Marshall Islands DAO Act of 2022, the original, I guess the whole reason for it was to create a registry that's not US based, and also is customized for DAOs in particular, not, let's say, like a foundation that has some traditional sort of corporate structures required. Um, I think one of the main goals was to be able to have a law that allows for a totally decentralized governing structure. So so on that foundation, I think a lot of what went into the amendment was to clarify some points that were actually true in the original but it just seems kind of like a gray area. And so we wanted to clarify certain provisions. And then there were a couple of things added. So I guess I sort of did it in order in my notes. So I'll just sort of like
Yeah.
throw them out there. Okay, so what you get in the Marshall Islands is a limited liability company, and you can have members, but you just need to have at least one member. You do not need to have any directors, no board of directors at all. And none of the members have to take on any extra fiduciary duties for the company at all. So you get this LLC, and it's based on the Limited Liability Act, of the Marshall Islands, which is modeled after the Delaware Act. And in the LLC Act of the Marshall Islands, there is a provision for series LLCs. And so in the amendment, we wanted to clarify that you can have these series with a DAO LLC. And I guess questions had come up in the last year whether the series had to go through all of the other requirements that the DAO itself would upon registration. And so it doesn't. And so that's part of the amendment. The series don't have to do anything beyond what the DAO itself is originally required to do. So that was a nice one to clarify. And then, some of the gray areas in this space have to do with securities, and we wanted to have a law where you don't jump to conclusions just because there's a token. and
Yeah.
basically what we did was made sure it was clear that as far as the Marshall Islands is concerned, the Securities and Investment Act of the Marshall Islands actually will not apply to your DAO issuing tokens as long as that DAO is not selling to a Marshall Islands resident. So it's just kind of a clarification about that. It also, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll ask after.
Right.
It's about the series DAO, but I'll ask after you summarize it.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I just going through the securities one. So basically the token, the NFTs issued and sold and transferred in by a nonprofit DAO will not be deemed a digital security as long as it's advancing its nonprofit purpose. So it kind of seems obvious, but it is just a gray area out there, and we wanted to codify that. So DAO LLCs registered in the Marshall Islands can go out in the world and have their own law backing them on that point. And then, yeah, so, and then as far as for-profit DAOs or any DAO, any kind of governance token that is conferring or is not conferring any economic rights won't be deemed a security. So it just kind of is backing for, just DAOs out there in the world, that the home country of the DAO LLC is, supporting this interpretation.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, and you touched on the series DAO LLC. Can I just say something about that? Ask you a question. So earlier this summer at ETH Prague, MakerDAO announced that they were going to be utilizing this as their legal strategy, that they were going to implement the series DAO LLC. I should say they didn't specify where. I don't believe it's in the Marshall Islands. That's not even the point, but they said that they were going to take this on as their legal strategy or legal engineering. And my understanding of the Series DAO LLC versus the DAO LLC, and I think this is important for the audience, is that the Series DAO LLC allows a DAO to birth what I call birth sub-DAOs. But the difference, because you can birth sub-DAOs in a regular DAO LLC, but my understanding is in the Series DAO LLC, each of those sub-DAOs are allowed to have their own governance structure. They don't need to have the same. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And that in the sub series, the way you described it, also can have its own individual limited liability for its, whatever for its activities, separate from the overarching DAO.
Wow, so that seems like a really useful legal utility for, I would say, maybe web3 projects are a little bit more, I guess you don't even have to be more advanced, but maybe a little further on their journey than, say, like a startup. But even a startup, I mean, the conversations that I have, and I know that you have, by everyday standards, like the end user on the other end of a call or on the other end of a Telegram chat is just smarter and smarter about these things every day. And I feel like they're becoming more and more sophisticated, which is, I think, amazing and helpful, but it's also a little dangerous because we see a lot of this copy pasting of legal engineering strategies, which, I guess we can get into when we get to the most commonly asked questions by a DAO. So were there any other key points within this new amendment from the DAO Act of 2022 that the audience should know about?
Let's see. There we go. Let me just check my notes here. Those are, oh yes, there are. The record keeping and retention.
Okay.
So, right. A Marshall Islands DAO is not required to keep all of its records in writing and files kept at a registered agent's office. Everything, all the contracts, all the details can be kept on the blockchain. And as long as it's accessible, nobody can come in and demand to investigate and demand inspection.
Okay.
Of course, the government officials that suspect something can go in, but this is something that's different than other jurisdictions. You just don't have to have your traditional record keeping requirements, and all of that is just clarified in the new law.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, because most DAOs probably have those records, but it's nice not to have that compliance burden, right? Like, because that's really okay, there's a privacy concern, but then there's also this compliance burden, I think, that all DAOs struggle with. Is just, there's so much from an administration standpoint in general. And then if you add on this compliance factor, it sort of it ups the ante on the requirements for a DAO and the resources that you need to support it and ensure that it is compliant. So that's good to know. And any other major points that were key?
Just to wrap that up. Yeah, so there's just no separate requirement to keep books of accounts and meeting minutes as long as it's publicly available on the blockchain. So let's see, moving to the next thing. It specifically allows for DAOs to use blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and they're not necessarily automatically considered virtual asset service providers. That it's all set forth clearly in the law now, and it also specifically states that DAOs are permitted to create open source software, which is then used by other people on a blockchain independent of the DAO's involvement. So that kind of, puts to rest some questions about that.
Okay, so that it's not IP of the DAO, it's actually open source that anybody can use, and the DAO doesn't therefore own
Yeah,
it or ultimately.
exactly. The DAO can exist separately from the software created.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like some great points there from an amendment standpoint, and also to give clarification, because those are the types of questions that people ask, right? And I guess, I don't know if you want to continue on, or if you want to, because it sort of dovetails into the next learning point about comparing Marshall Islands to some of the other usual suspects, or I would say
Yeah,
most popular suspects. So
yeah.
I don't know if you want to get into that. And then I always say, and because I used to work in venture capital, Tatiana, I don't know if you knew that, but I
Mhm,
often say to people, the reason why the Cayman Islands is so famous with startup companies is that VCs made it famous
mhm,
a long
mhm.
time ago. And so there's this like hangover of, you just, get a Cayman Foundation, or you set up, if you're taking an investment from a VC firm or a seed fund or anything like this. And so I think it's just sort of a, and you're going to get into the details of it, but it's almost, lawyers do and recommend what they're experts in, right? And so if you talk with a lawyer that repeatedly recommends Cayman or one or the other, I mean, that's the area that they have the most expertise in, and therefore they're going to recommend always what is the best for your use case, right? But also, most lawyers don't recommend something that they haven't tried before.
Mhm.
Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would definitely say that's the case. And, reputation and just whether there's support for what the DAO is trying to do, based on requirements in the law. So going into the Cayman Islands, the Cayman Islands Foundation Companies Act of it was 2017. So that, it's not that old that there was
No,
this.
but I mean, since the 90s,
Oh,
and
right.
since
No,
the
yeah,
dot-com
absolutely. Yeah.
boom, you could, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Right. But for DAOs in particular, that's been the go-to, the foundation
Yeah.
company for DAOs. And I guess the the Marshall Islands laws were to sort of be an alternative to like the Cayman Foundation or the Swiss Foundation that have certain requirements that the Marshall Islands laws don't have. So just to jump right in, well, actually, both Cayman Foundation and Swiss Foundation, there's a requirement for directors who carry on the business of the DAO. Um, in a Cayman Foundation, members are not required. In Marshall Islands, you need at least one. But so if you don't have members in a Cayman Foundation, you have to have what they call a supervisor, that doesn't have ownership or economic rights per se, but this person has to be there to make sure that the board of directors is fulfilling its management obligations. It also requires Cayman Foundation also requires a secretary, which needs to be a qualified person under their laws, to provide the company management and also to act as the registered agent or registered office. So in the Marshall Islands, you do not have any requirement for a local representative on the ground at all. The registered agent is My DAO Directory Services, and there's there's an address in the Marshall Islands for the registered agent, and it's the same for all DAO LLCs registered in the Marshalls. So that's a big difference. And as you can imagine, having to designate secretary and a board, that could be costly. And whereas operating a Marshall Islands DAO would be less expensive for that reason. Also, foundation companies and Swiss companies have record keeping requirements, and they have to, accounting records, a register of supervisors, members, minutes, and just, because they're going to be, well, I don't know so much about Cayman Islands, so don't quote me on the Cayman. I'm not a Cayman Islands attorney. This is just kind of what I've been picking up. I know, like in a Swiss foundation, there's audits that can be quite painful. So there's that. Also, I'd say that in the Caymans and Swiss foundations, the directors and managers would have some bit of liability if they fail to do certain things and keep records and comply with the laws. So in a Marshall Islands company, there isn't any additional liability imposed upon any of the members, because nobody has to be the board or the managing members whatsoever. So
I hear a lot. No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but so I heard you say a lot of things there, and I've heard a lot of questions around this topic. People often ask, like when I say people, I mean DAOs that are conducting due diligence so that they can figure out what type of legal entity they need, and then they usually pull in their Web3 lawyer, or they call someone like you. Often I hear a question about, I don't want to have a board, because in the eyes of the law, a board can portray the image of being centrally controlled, because ultimately, what is the role of a board, right?
Right. Yep.
So I guess if you're like I'm just going to use an example of like a big DeFi protocol that has, a bullseye on its back and a lot to risk. I mean, is that why a lot of these big projects are doing things like, I hear a lot of lawyers say, like diversifying my jurisdiction portfolio and fancy terms like that? Is that why there's this legal arbitrage that's going on, so that you can have coverage via various jurisdictions that have laws to protect certain aspects of what you're doing? Is that why there's sort of like this Lego effect or slice and dice of legal engineering?
Well, I can't say for certain, but I think you're probably right. I know that some projects want to have the possibility of having a totally decentralized DAO, and this is possible in the Marshall Islands. So that is definitely one of the advantages if you're one of those types of organizations. I would say also that what you have in the Marshall Islands, what the requirement there is, because this is a question too. Well, then how do you enforce? How do you know who the members are? What if they do something wrong? How does that work? So basically, the process is when you register, as you know, the beneficial owner or beneficial member, which means 25% or more interest in the company, has to do the registration and go through a KYC process. So that person will be documented. If nobody is 25% or more, then somebody needs to step up and be the contact person for the DAO. But anyone who's not a beneficial owner can remain basically anonymous. this was asked the other day about enforcement. Well, then what if, how do you get to the members? I don't know. I think that is an issue, like for international law enforcement. But for the most part, these DAOs are all lawful and have these really exciting creative projects going on. And it's not, I just don't think that this creative outlet to, do amazing things should be curtailed by what a few bad actors,
Yeah.
will do.
Yeah. Because
You
bad actors have been around since the beginning of time. They always will be. And, we can put these measures in place to try to limit that as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, I think they're as old as time, and I think they'll continue on, into the metaverse, if you will. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And that's very interesting. And so with regards to like the big differentiators between Marshall Islands and, as you said, like Cayman and Swiss, it sounds like because those were available a few years before the Marshall Islands DAO LLC, that's probably why they have this whole community that's leveraged those legal instruments or legal entities to use. But a lot of them seem like they're kind of coming back to the drawing board to say, like, how can I simplify things? And also, because we are in this market, I mean, it might not seem like a lot of money to a big project that looks like, it's pulling in a lot of money and has a massive treasury, but these costs are ongoing and they're basically for life, right? Like, it's not just a one-time registration fee. All of these legal entities, including Marshall Islands, but you and I probably know more details about that one, but the costs I know for some of the other ones, I'll just say, can be quite hefty. And really, I would say, to my knowledge, it's really only the really big projects that can afford those types of budgets.
Yeah,
That's what I see.
Yes,
Okay.
I would agree with that.
So any other major like highlights between, so it sounds like the biggest differentiator on those three is that Marshall Islands, you don't need a board of directors, and the other ones you do. And I guess you could say the con of needing the board of directors is you have to hire them, right? Like through a local corporate service provider, whether that's in the Cayman Islands or in Switzerland, and they need to adhere to whatever compliance requirements each of those jurisdictions have for those legal entities.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
sort of like,
Yes,
and then
like the Swiss Foundation too has a capital and contribution requirement. So that's also, I think, a pretty hefty amount, which only bigger projects would be, would want to pay.
and the all three of them, or
Oh, no, just the Swiss Foundation, from what I
okay, yeah.
understand.
But and I don't mean to put you on the spot here because I know your expertise is Marshall Island, but my understanding is that the Marshall Islands is the only sovereign jurisdiction that has a comprehensive web3 legislation, whereas the Cayman and Swiss and like all these other jurisdictions throughout the world, and even sort of like the Wyoming, DAO LLC, there's nuances there. And I guess, when we say Wyoming, that's in the US, and there's a lot of people hesitant about having a global DAO that has an American legal entity because the environment and the legislation in the US is not there yet, and not the most friendly environment right now. And so I think it makes it really difficult to not only attract new members or founding members to your DAO, but to retain people, because I even hear stories about people not running again for election for like multi-sig because they found out the legal entity that was chosen for their project is, I won't name any jurisdictions, but let's say it was in a jurisdiction that they didn't feel safe in, or some other projects realized their DAO doesn't even have a legal entity, and therefore they took a step back because they said, hey, wait a minute, if something goes wrong here, I could be held personally liable, because without any legal entity, according to Google and all these other resources, I'm considered a general partnership, which puts every person at risk, right? Like if there's nothing in place, we could have a group of 10 amazing people, and then, we're human and people disagree and we iterate on projects, especially when we're in these types of markets where we have to constantly navigate what's working, what's not, product market fit, and people are fine tuning and changing. And not everybody in a DAO will agree the direction that you go in. And I've seen cases where, multi-sigs, people just ghost and rage quit. And, you've got a treasury that's locked up because somebody just disappeared and ghosted, and people can't access that money, which is a real shame, because it's not like they're looking to line their pockets with it. They're looking to further build out their project, and then that gets halted because of these types of things. So yeah, those are like the real examples. They're not just sort of like pie in the sky examples that lawyers and myself use. Like those are real cases that we've seen unfold in projects, and even projects that I've worked in. I've seen some funky things.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to, kind of back up to what you were starting, or to what you said earlier, is that a lot of these structures that are well known, like the Cayman Foundation, the Swiss Foundation, it's sort of that the DAO is being fit into it, and it wasn't necessarily tailored specifically for DAOs, which is what the Marshall Islands law does. It's tailored specifically for the unique characteristics of DAOs, which is comforting, for DAOs coming into this. And just to sort of plug Marshall Islands some more, I mean, I tried to demystify some of the background of Marshall Islands, and people have heard of Swiss foundations and Cayman foundations, and they have their robust banking systems and reputation. But I would also say that the Marshall Islands is also a stable country. It has a relationship with the United States. Everything's based on the US dollar. English is the language that's used. The laws and the legal system are all modeled after US, but an advantage is that it isn't the US. But so it has, these things that are like the US, but not the US. So that's just, adding to the Marshall Islands promo. But yeah, absolutely what you were saying about, hey, shouldn't, am I protected here, and all those things. I feel like the Marshall Islands has this structure and laws supporting it that give the members limited liability, so that if the DAO were to get into some issue because of operating with third parties out in the world, and there's disagreements and whatever can happen, then the members are protected. And there's a whole legal system to support the DAO, and laws to support the DAO specifically. I would, if I were a member, and I am, but if I were a member of a DAO, I would be asking, how am I protected here? And I would want to know what kind of legal entity the DAO is, if any.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to say, so this is perfect. So we have about 5 minutes left, and it sort of dovetails into what you just said. So maybe we can cover a mix between the most commonly asked questions that you see when you talk with DAOs, and then I'll take a couple of questions that have come in from viewers. And so one of the questions, actually, if I could, is just what you just said. Is somebody asked, and I think probably you and I can both answer this. Somebody asked, if I'm a member of a DAO, and they write, and I am of several, how do I go about finding out if the DAO that I'm in has a legal entity? So, if you want to take a stab at that, you can, and then I can add on to it, because I'm actually in the throes of this right now with one of the DAOs that I'm a part of.
Yeah, you can definitely answer that one.
Okay.
Short of actually asking the DAO
Yeah,
member,
I was going to
that
say,
was
you
the
have
main
to.
thing. Where are the members based? Can you look at a registry in the jurisdiction where most of the activity is going on, or where most of the members are based, if they know that? But yeah, I'm not quite sure how you would immediately know without
You
asking.
would, yeah, I was just gonna say, if I can piggyback on that, you wouldn't unless they make it a point of posting it, like when you join, for example, whatever tool that they're using to manage their community, unless they post that somewhere public for everyone to see, I
Mhm.
don't, short of that, there's no way to know without asking. And I would suggest that the best way to go about asking is to, if there's like, excuse me, like a weekly community call or something like this that brings the entire community together, or if there's a legal guild or a legal group within your DAO,
Mhm.
ask there, because that's where you'll definitely get the most attention. Because I would think that most lawyers that are part of a DAO project probably ask that question before they join, or maybe they're working on ensuring that that DAO has a legal entity. So I would say ask on a community call so that everyone knows, so that everyone can get the benefit of learning that that's a great question. And number two, short of that, if there isn't, there should be a community call, but if you don't have something like this, I would say just go ask around to like the people that you see as the most consistent contributors, maybe the people that are most vocal, and just ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. We all do it, so that's what I would encourage. Yeah. So Tatiana, do you want to just alternate between that and then a couple of other commonly asked questions?
We've covered all of these, but yeah, some of the main questions are, do you have to have somebody on the ground in the Marshall Islands as your local representative?
Oh, okay.
And no, you do not. Do you have to have, is there a particular structure that you have to have? Do you have to have a board of directors? Do you have to have management? And no, you do not. You have quite a bit of flexibility in the Marshall Islands. Nobody has to be above anyone else. If you don't want to, you can structure it how you want. That flexibility is really attractive. You can be totally decentralized. What else? Do you have to have a capital investment uh, to register? No, you do not.
Mm,
um,
beautiful.
can you sue and be sued? Yes, you can, because you're a legal entity, an LLC, and you have a corporate personality. So yes.
Right.
Um, can you get a certificate of good standing, like to say that you're validly existing? Yes, you can. So those are some of the main ones that I get over and over again.
Okay, those are great questions. I'm going to go through a couple of questions and then we'll wrap it up in like 3 minutes here.
Sure.
We got the question about, oh, okay, you mentioned something about this new amendment addresses the VASP, which is a virtual
Yeah.
asset service provider. Is that, can you talk about that more, or is that just, it's available, it's not available?
Okay, so in the amendment, it contemplates that DAOs can be VASPs. It says that if a DAO is a VASP, it needs to follow the Banking Act. And in the Banking Act, it requires VASPs to obtain a license. As of today, there are no licenses being issued because regulations haven't been issued yet. That is,
Okay.
and there are conversations going on about those regulations being drafted and passed. So it is on the horizon, but thus far, none of the DAO LLCs in the Marshall Islands have been interpreted as VASPs.
Okay, interesting. And then, so it's very exciting that, so we're kind of at the top of the hour, a little bit over here, but I really appreciate talking with you about this. And I know that everyone I talk with always wants to know how to get in touch with you, where you are. Like I say, you're like the special unicorn that everybody's dying to find. So I just want to mention your contact info up here. If people want to get in touch with you, is the best way through Telegram? Do you prefer email? Do you want them to go to your website?
Email is actually good. Telegram, fine.
Okay.
Yeah, just go to my website and you can email me through there.
Get you?
But
Okay.
yeah.
And anybody... Okay, all right. So for anybody that's not watching it, is just listening. So the website XYZ, and Tatiana's Telegram is at DAO Lawyers with an S at the end. And again, her name is Tatiana Cerullo. She's a licensed lawyer in the Marshall Islands, the state of New York, and the state of Hawaii, with both maritime and web3 law, which I think is fascinating because I think there's actually a lot of commonalities between, I'll just say the borderlessness of maritime law and some of the ambiguities that come up, and also the borderlessness of DAOs. And so there seems like there's a lot of parallels there, and we could do another talk on that.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you, Tatiana. I really appreciated everything you shared with us. And we will put this out for a live stream. Well, it is live stream, so people can watch it live. And we'll post it out on other socials like Twitter for other people to have it. And then, like we said, if you have questions for either one of us, but especially if you have questions for Tatiana, go to daolawyer.xyz. And her Telegram, again, is DAO Lawyers with an S at the end. And I'm on Telegram also, Jonna ETH, ETH. And it's a wrap, Tatiana. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who tuned in.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tatiana. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.